Okay, I think we're good to go. From my side, I would like to welcome our honorary ranger friends across the country to this very interesting webinar tonight. And I would also like to extend a warm welcome to other guests. I believe there are quite a number of guests watching the webinar, non-honorary ranger friends, and heartily welcome to you guys as well. We are very fortunate to have tonight with us Chris Patton. He's a good friend of the honorary rangers, and he comes with quite an interesting CV. I never realized, but Chris was born in Northern Ireland, but his parents immigrated to South Africa when he was 11 years old. He told us that his earliest birding memory was lying on the grass at the top of a sea cliff with his dad, looking down on nesting auks and other seabirds. And that set the tone for a lifelong interest in birds. So without stealing your thunder, Chris, of course, the term auk is new to me. I only know South African birds, and I read up about the birds a bit, and it seems like I can understand why you were hooked when you watched them nesting. Chris has also, he's got a master's degree in environmental and geographical science, plus an undergraduate degree in English. Both these degrees he received from UCT, so good old Cape Townian boy. And he had planned to become an environmental journalist, but has worked for SANParks since 1998. He worked in several capacities in Kruger and SANParks head office. Currently, he's done a lot of project work through all the parks, and he's currently based in Knysna in the Garden Route National Park, and he works as a content manager on interpretation, visitor management, universal access, and tourism research across all parks. He has a fond history with the SANParks honorary rangers. He was appointed as the SANParks coordinator for the honorary rangers corps, a position that he worked, if I'm not mistaken, from 2003 to 2007. After that, he participated in many indabas. We've seen Chris at many of our indabas, and he's indeed a dear friend to the Honorary Ranger Corps. Bird-wise, he has written many articles and social media and website material about birds and birding in SANParks, and I'm sure if you're a keen birder, you may have come across some of his writings. While at UCT, Chris had an accident and he fell off Table Mountain, and he has lived as a paraplegic for over 30 years now. He's married and he has a daughter, and he also plays lawn bowls. He even got a medal for South Africa at the last Commonwealth Games. So he's a keen lawn bowler. That takes up a lot of his time, and I suppose it's a toss-up between birding and lawn bowling. But Chris, with that, welcome. It's great to have you here. Just before I hand over to you, I just want to explain the house rules for tonight. You are, of course, more than welcome to post questions for Chris. And I would like to ask that those of you that are watching the webinar live to please pose your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom. and not in the chat. You can chat with each other in the chat box if you like, but let's post the questions in the Q&A section, please. And then those of you that are watching to us through Facebook, you're more than welcome to post your questions there as well. It will be relayed to us, and at the end of Chris's talk, we will then handle the Q&A section. With that, Chris, I'm going to hand over to you, and welcome, and we are awaiting your session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willie, for that introduction, and hello everyone, friends and bird enthusiasts. I suspect I'm going to be preaching to the converted tonight. Most of you will already have your own birding experiences, probably in visiting some of our national parks. But as this has gone out further than just the Honorary Ranger Corps, to a lot of people on SANParks social media, I think there'll be a number of people around the world who maybe don't have the same intimate understanding of the park. So I'll give a brief overview to try and make sure everyone's up to speed. So let me share my screen and find the presentation and put it into display mode, which I think is that one there. And if I can just go back a slide, there's my introductory slide. So yeah, the talk is called Avian Adventures in South African National Parks. Avian, of course, is a term that means birds and birding, and avi-tourism. And avi-tourism is globally recognized as the most important niche specialized ecotourism market in terms of number and in terms of revenue generation. And that's something that was backed up by the Department of Trade and Industry here in South Africa, and they realized the immense value to the country, particularly in rural communities, trying to get community interested in birds and their protection and guiding. So it's got wonderful opportunities. What I have to say at the outset is SANParks is not in the avi-tourism industry alone. Has very close partnerships with the South African Honorary Rangers. A lot of initiatives are sort of beyond our designated capital budget, and we have to lean heavily on the HRs to do fundraising and provide specialist facilities or host events in our parks to do with birding. And also we have a very special relationship with BirdLife South Africa, and have worked on a number of initiatives. In fact, this talk that I'm giving tonight was first given as one of their webinars last night. Hang on, the building alarm is going off. Just need to move around to kill it. Yeah, they did a series of webinars. They still do it every Tuesday night, and they dedicated a whole year to profiling SANParks. And I will be referring to these talks. They are available for download on our website and on their YouTube platform. But yeah, we've got a special relationship with them too. But let me kick off with a question to all of you. Why would a person want to go birding in one of South Africa's national parks? And that's a bit of a duh question that we all instinctively know. It's because there's loads of birds there, big and small, beautiful and drab, active birds, skulking birds, that sort of thing. But the question is, one of the sort of feedback that we got from the last time I gave this presentation, people wanted to know what the images on display were. And in these sort of introductory slides, I didn't do that last time. On the left there at the bottom is a beautiful violet-backed starling, formerly known as a plum-colored starling. And the one on the right with the big hooter is a knob-billed duck. Both those shots were taken in Kruger National Park. But the reason there's so many birds in South African national parks is because of habitat. We are the custodians of South Africa's biodiversity and conserve areas within the various nationally significant biomes all around the country. This is a habitat biome map of South Africa. I suspect most of you will know it pretty well. But for those of you who don't, or just to give a refresher, South Africa is primarily split down the middle. The western half of the country tends to be very arid, and the eastern half tends to get higher rainfall, being more moisture driven. And even within, you'll see sort of the top portion of the map of South Africa is that sort of light creamy yellow color. That's the savanna biome, and the sort of left-hand portion of that is arid savanna, whereas in the eastern sections in Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal, and Mpumalanga, that's more moist, low-felt savanna. But from a South African point of view, the most important biomes are the two in the left-hand side of the screen that I'm circling with my mouse now. The scarlet red section is the fynbos biome, which is your proteas, your restio reeds, your ericas, and the sort of light purple biome is the succulent Kruger, which, as the name suggests, is full of succulents and arid desert plants. And those two areas combine to form the Cape Floral Kingdom, and that's uniquely South African. So when it comes to endemic species that are only found there and anywhere else, so there's a high degree of endemism in those biomes. So if you're a birder and you want to see certain species, you've got to travel there. If you want to see sheer numbers of birds, then you want to go to the subtropical parts of the country, and there places like Kruger and Mapungubwe in the savanna biome are the place to go. But the nice thing is, as travelers and potential ecotourists, we can travel to all these biomes, and most of us, as we get into birds, will start developing a hit list where we want to go and target certain species. And that's the nice thing about birders. They become very obsessive, and they travel to places like the parks to see certain things. Often it's done in conjunction with just general wildlife watching and experiencing the various activities and facilities in the park. So it's a wonderful complementary activity, as well as being, for some people, a complete obsession. Other biomes to mention along the Orange River there, that orange snake, that's the South Africa's only true desert biome. That big swathe of mustard colored yellow in the sort of western half of the country is the Nama Karoo. So unlike the succulent Kruger, which is more geophytes and succulents, it's more a sort of scrubby, low-cut, arid grassland. This big blob of green in the eastern half of the country is the grassland biome. And that is South Africa's most underprotected biome. A lot of the grasslands of the country are used for agricultural purposes. And there's very few. In fact, until the start of this year, there was only one national park that was exclusively in the grasslands biome. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment when I show a map of all the South African parks. The only ones we haven't mentioned yet, this little green snake down the east coast, is the Indian Ocean coastal belt. In the distant past, it was considered part of the grassland biome, but it's now given its own identity. And mostly it doesn't affect SANParks. It affects sort of provincial parks in KwaZulu-Natal, but it does extend down into Addo National Park in the Eastern Cape. So it does have a small presence in SANParks. That sort of dark red in the Eastern Cape is the Albany thicket biome, and that's kind of a sort of succulent woodland. And it's kind of a buffer zone between your sort of grassland and savanna biomes of the east and your Nama Karoo and fynbos biomes of the west. So there's not a high degree of endemism there, but because you've got all those different microhabitats in a relatively small area, there's a lot of degree of difference. So it's an exciting area to visit. But basically, if I move on to the map of South African national parks and their locations, all the parks have their own attractions, and a little later in the presentation, I'm going to run through a couple of slides on each park, telling you a bit about those parks, some of the birding attractions there, some of the facilities you can find there. So yeah, this is a map of South Africa again with our national parks, and you can see, if you can remember the previous slide, there's some in the fynbos biome down the bottom there. You've got West Coast, Table Mountain, Agulhas, Bontebok, and Garden Route, where I'm talking to you from today. You've got Tankwa Karoo and Namakwa and the succulent Karoo. You've got Richtersveld up there in the mountain desert. Machrabis also sort of on the fringes of the Karoo, but flowing into the savanna area. Kgalagadi there in the arid savanna. Golden Gate in the grasslands. Makala there in the center of the country near Kimberley is also one of those sort of juxtaposition transition areas between Nama Karoo, the grasslands, and the arid savanna. So that gives a nice diversity there. Then you've got some parks down in the sort of Albany thicket of the Eastern Cape, but also fringing with the Nama Karoo and the grasslands. So those are nice parks to visit. But let me ask another question to you: how to go about maximizing birding in the parks, and to make use of the facilities and activities you're going to find there. The first is to look at the road infrastructure through the parks. That's something that wasn't specifically built for birding, but it's a real great enabler for people who are wanting to go birding. And one must always view those who are doing self-drive into the park. Your vehicle is like a mobile hide and allows you to get close to birds for photography and viewing pleasure. But if you think about it, those of you who know Kruger well, there's that tar road that runs through the spine of the park from north to south, with all arterial roads running to each of the 12 rest camps. And then there's a whole lot of arterial capillary gravel roads that take you to bird hides and water holes and places of interest. So using the roads in the park facilitates birding. If you think of a park like Kgalagadi, where you've got your road is basically the two dry river beds of the Arb River along the park's western boundary and the Nossob River along the park's eastern boundary. And there's a couple of linking roads across the dunes, but essentially you're driving on dry river beds. There's parks, as you can see down in this picture here, that go up a mountain pass. That's in Karoo National Park. But a lot of the parks, particularly in the mountainous areas, Mountain Zebra, Marakele, Golden Gate, have roads that enable you as an individual to get into sort of rough terrain that if they weren't there would make birding very difficult in those parks. The next feature of parks that is of interest to a birder is water. Pretty much all the parks revolve around water. So whether it's major rivers like the Limpopo, you've got Kruger and Mapungubwe that flank the Limpopo River, or you've got Machrabis and the Richtersveld that flank the Orange River. Or you've got a park like West Coast National Park that revolves around a lagoon, or down here in the Garden Reach, you've got your series of freshwater lakes and river estuaries that are features of the park. Or even a dry arid park like Kgalagadi, where you've got a sort of whole series of little water troughs that have been built primarily to attract game, but they attract birds too. First come the little seed eaters and doves and sandgrass that need to have their daily intake of water, and then the raptors follow them. So they attract a whole sort of new suite of birds, not especially aquatic birds, but some of the other water features I mentioned in some of the parks are primarily about aquatic birds. There's also coastal parks. SANParks is 6 coastal parks: Namakwa, West Coast, Table Mountain, Agulhas, Garden Route, and Addo Elephant are our 6 coastal parks. And there you get exposed to coastal birds and pelagic species, which is a different sort of habitat and part of the birding experience. Then you've got your rest camps and picnic sites. Now, rest camps are usually well appointed, often on rivers or dams or hillsides. So they're wonderful areas. They often contain a lot of indigenous bush, but they're slightly manicured. And the birds that are in these rest camps and picnic sites become habituated. They become used to human presence. And that enables us as birders to get closer to them, to take photographs, to look at them through our binoculars. So an exciting advantage that one needs to use when visiting national parks. Then if roads are what enables vehicles to penetrate the various habitats, trails and walkways into challenging vegetation are something that needs to be utilized when you want to be on foot, or in my case, on wheel. You'll see that picture down there in the bottom left-hand corner. That's along the Indian Ocean seaboard in Agulhas National Park. And if I hadn't had that boardwalk, I wouldn't have been able to have a look at a pteric sandpiper that I was gazing at as that photograph was taken. Then you've got more focused and dedicated birding structures like bird hides and lookout platforms. And we've got bird hides in, I think, 13 of our 20 parks, and a park like Kruger has 12 bird hides out in the general park, and then there's a few more in some of the rest camps. And very often these were constructed in partnership with the SANParks honorary rangers, who often did the fundraising and had our sort of technical staff do the construction of those things. And those are wonderful places to sort of sit and observe and let the birds come to you. Very often, and it's the same when you're out in a car, very often if you stop in a nice position, turn the engine off and let the birds come to you, that's particularly relevant in places like the Karoo, where you think at first there's nothing there. The moment you turn your engine off and just listen, birds appear out of nowhere. Lookout platforms are good because a lot of the larger birds catch thermals, and if you position yourself like I am there in Mapungubwe on that lookout platform at the confluence of the three countries, the Limpopo and Shashe River, you'll get a lot of birds that are soaring the skies, and you can scan and get good sightings that way. Then you've got bird interpretation centers and displays. Sometimes the interpretation displays are part of an overall larger display, but in some cases they might be dedicated. One thinks of the penguin colony at Boulders in Simonstown in Table Mountain National Park, or the raptor center in Martamata Rest Camp in Kgalagadi, or the vulture displays in Marakele and Golden Gate. But we'll touch on those a little later under the individual parks. And another thing to try and look and take advantage of is guided walks and drives. Again, that's a thing that in partnership with BirdLife South Africa, we're trying to extend into the communities and use community guides. But very often park activity staff have also done some level of training to give them advanced knowledge. And by interacting and indicating that you have a keenness to do birding, they will very often be able to take you to special places and show you special things. One great example of that is in the far north of Kruger. Every November and December every year, the pennant-winged nightjars come into their breeding plumage with their long sort of trailing pennants that hang out the back of their wings. And if you speak to the camp there and say, look, I want to do a night drive, but I'd rather sort of go and see the nightjars rather than necessarily the other big five type animals that your other tourists might want to see, they can very often make a plan to take you there. Some of the wilderness trails in Kruger Park and some of the other parks are also great. The guides there love to have participants who are keen birders, so that they can maybe show them different things to the usual regular larger animals. And designated birding weekends. And again, I have to pay homage here to the SANParks honorary rangers. The very first birding weekends that were arranged started back in 1998, my very first year of working for SANParks. They were set up in Kruger. We only used 5 camps in that very first year, and there were less than 100 participants. But now every single rest camp in the park takes part in these annual weekends that are held at the end of the busy summer tourism season at the end of January and start of February. And it's an opportunity for getting people into the park outside of peak periods, but it's really special opportunity because the honorary rangers get sponsors and allow the accommodation, make it available at a sort of a discounted rate. They also solicit bird experts and plan routes that take you into sort of areas off the beaten track. And they pretty much have been extended, I think, to all the parks and it's been an absolute privilege to take part in many birding weekends, both as a guide and as a guest. So yeah, I strongly encourage you all to try and get onto those. Just a quick word on hides. The BirdLife South Africa have built, created a very thorough hide design guide. You see it there, that's the sort of front page, and it's something back in 2013. And they did so in partnership with us. I worked closely with Ernst, and we looked at how to make the hides accessible to all people, regardless of their physical and sensory capabilities, but also from a birding point of view to look at their positioning, to maximize photography, light, that sort of thing. So they've done great work and need to be applauded for that. And then just to get back to the map of the parks, because I'm now going to run through a sort of profile of all the parks. There's just a reminder of where they all are. And I'm going to start down in the sort of southwestern Cape, some of our Cape parks. Then I'll move into the frontier parks in the Eastern Cape, the arid parks of the Northern Cape, and then some of the northern parks in Free State and Limpopo provinces, before finishing up with the mighty Kruger Park there up in the northeastern corners of the country. So yeah, let's start off with Table Mountain National Park. Obviously a park having fallen off the mountain and ended up in a wheelchair. I have a real spiritual connection to the place, but it's a wonderful birding destination. You can see the urban sprawl of Cape Town there. This is quite an alternate view of the mountain, taken from the top of Lion's Head in the air. So it's not quite as flat looking as when you look at the mountain from lower down, but you can see the urban sprawl of Cape Town, the city bowl on the left, Camps Bay and Clifton on the right there. So there's a lot of urban birds, but you're in the fynbos biome, as I mentioned earlier, but there's also little pockets of forest. Obviously, cliff and mountains are also a feature. So there's a number of species there that are attractions. Even the sort of forests on the back of Table Mountain that have been heavily encroached with exotic alien species such as pine and oak trees. They have, it's the best place in South Africa to find common chaffinch, which was one of those introduced species that was introduced from Europe and has made its home there. It's also become a nesting location for some of our sparrowhawk species like black sparrowhawk and rufous-chested sparrowhawk. They like the sort of exotic trees. And there are also still patches of indigenous forests, so it's good to get into those in places like Takai and Celia State Forest and Newlands within the park. But the other feature, when you visit Table Mountain National Park for the first time, the penguin colony at Boulders Beach. It's the world's most accessible penguin colony, land-based penguin colony. And I'm honored to say that I played a small role in its design to make it universally accessible to all people. So there's this wonderful boardwalk that takes people down right to the beach, so you can get up close and personal with penguins at close range, get nice photographs and not disturb them too much. One of the other attractions of Table Mountain is that it turns up an extraordinary number of rarities. And there's several reasons for this. Some birds get storm blown across the Atlantic Ocean, so they're American species that turn up there. All these three rare birds down in the sort of bottom half of the slide were taken off Trevor Hardiker's Rare Bird Network News, which is a bi-weekly publication where he publishes photographs and details of all the rare bird sightings around the country. And that central photo there is an American golden plover that my old varsity friend Michael Buckham took. And like I say, it was sort of an American species blown across the Atlantic, probably by a storm. But then you get some subantarctic species like this king penguin that possibly was a ship-assisted bird, somehow found its way up along the South African shoreline there. The one in the bottom left-hand corner is a Eurasian honey buzzard. That's a migrant species that comes to South Africa every year and makes use of the semi-exotic forests in Takai and Newlands and Cecilia. The habitat there, because there's some exotics, probably remind them of their Eurasian breeding home. But when they're here for our summer, their northern winter, they end up there, and it's a good place to go and see them. Then you've also got a phenomenon called reverse migration, where birds get their inner compass wrong. So instead of migrating back to the northern hemisphere when they go the opposite direction, and then they get to the bottom of the African continent and find they can go no further. So parks like Table Mountain, Agulhas, which we'll look at just now, and Garden Route National Park, sort of at the bottom end of the continent, end up, getting a whole lot of birds that shouldn't normally be there, but for strange reasons do. So yeah, we will talk a bit more about that on some of the other parks. So now we move to West Coast National Park, and that's all about the Langebaan Lagoon, and that's a Ramsar site. Ramsar, if you don't know that term, is a water body of international importance to birds. There was a Ramsar Convention that was held amongst all the sort of countries around the world, I think at the start of the 70s, and gave status to wetlands of international importance to birds from that. And South Africa has several, and several of them are in national parks, but the lagoon here is important. So what happens is you get these birds that breed in the Arctic Circle in the sort of northern summer, where the Arctic Circle becomes just a wealth of insects and feeding material for these birds. And then when it freezes over, because it's sort of in the Arctic Circle, they have to migrate, and they come down to the bottom of the African continent. And then it's all about the food supply they can get. There's such rich nourishment in the salt pans that are at the southern end of the lagoon, where I'm circling with the mouse at the moment. So for 5 or 6 months of the year, these birds just do nothing but eat, because they've got a 20,000-30,000 kilometer journey, and they need to get food supplies. And when they get to their ultimate destination, either arriving or when they arrive in the Arctic Circle on the other side, they're sort of a shadow of their former selves. They lose so much body mass during that migration process. But the great thing is, in the park, there's a series, I think there's 4 hides. There used to be a 5th hide, but I think one's become derelict. 2 at Geelbeek. You can see the hide in question there is what the older hide at Geelbeek. There's another one at Seerberg. And then there's one on a freshwater lake, not on the lagoon, at Abrahamskraal. That's where these juvenile white-throated swallows were taken, but I'll get onto that in a minute. Let me first talk about the hides that are on the lagoon. The trick to seeing birds at the lagoon is to get there when there's an incoming tide, because then the birds get pushed closer and closer to the hide. And first, the ones with short legs have to fly away when the water levels get too high, and then the longer legged species. But you can get an idea from that photograph there that it's a complete feeding frenzy. So in that photograph, you've got 3 species. You've got turnstones, you've got sanderlings, and you've got curlew sandpipers. And they all get pushed closer and closer, and you get great photographic opportunity. And every year, there's rarities that turn up. If I go back to Trevor Hardaker's Rare Bird Network News, every year you'll find there's things like red shank and lesser yellowlegs, bairds and broad-billed sandpipers, groovy species like that are real rarities to this part of the African continent that turn up there. And it's all because of these hides enable the birders to sort of sit and get closer to birds. Another feature, well, let me talk a little bit about Abrahamskraal. I said it's a freshwater lake, so it's got a different suite of birds to the sort of coastal and lagoon species that you're seeing at Geelbeek. It's more freshwater species like ducks and herons and moorhens and gallinules, that sort of thing. And then, as I said, the little white-breasted swallows nest inside the hide, allowing for wonderful photographs. The other thing that I didn't talk about, but at the entrance to Langebaan Lagoon in Saldanha Bay, there's a series of coastal islands that are used as breeding sites for several birds. So there's this one here in front of us is called Malgas Island, which is Afrikaans for gannet. So there's a huge big Cape gannet colony. Cape gannets are one of our endemic South African seabirds. There's also those the coastal marine cormorants, the Cape, the bank, and the crowned cormorant that are easily sort of seen on these coastal islands. Unfortunately for the visiting tourist, the coastal islands are currently a restricted area because of their sensitivity and importance as a breeding location. But there's plans afoot to sort of change that and allow birders to get access to the islands to see some things. And now normally, as South Africans who are very passionate sports watchers, we're very anti-Australian, particularly on the rugby field and the cricket field. But there's a couple of Australian strays that are in residence on Malgas Island in West Coast National Park. A couple of Australian gannets, which are very close species to our Cape gannet. And the main difference is our Cape gannet has got a big black stripe down the throat. You can just see it on that bird on left there where my arrow is. But that one there in photograph is an Australian gannet, and it's a welcome Australian for a change. Let's talk about Agulhas National Park. That's the southern tip of Africa and the meeting point, the real meeting point of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. So from a geographic point of view, it's got a real significance, and there's a wonderful display about the tip of the African continent and the two oceans if you travel to the park. But from a birding point of view, the real attraction is you're set in the heart of Strandveld, and some wonderful fanball species that you're going to get to see there. In that sort of Agulhas plain, there's Agulhas longbill larks, there's fanballs button quails, the striped flufftails, things that you're going to get up close and personal to, orange-breasted sunbirds. And it's a wonderful opportunity. What I do need to say, and I meant to say on Table Mountain and West Coast National Park, is those BirdLife talks. So Trevor Hardacre, Mr. Reb Bird, South Africa himself, did a wonderful talk on West Coast National Park, and you can access it off the SANParks website if you go to the webinars link. And Dr. Wim de Klerk has done a wonderful talk about the birds and birding in the Agulhas plain, and that'll give you a lot of specific pointers. So I'm just going to give a general overview of my own sort of personal experience there. The nice thing about traveling to Agulhas is you're set right in the Strandveld if you're staying in the accommodation at Agulhas rest camp, and you get wonderful close encounters with this bird on the top right there. That's South African endemic species, the black harrier, which is a fanball specialist. It breeds in the fanballs, and then during the rest of the year, it will often get nomadic and end up in the grassland areas of the country and can turn up in other places. But it always comes back to the fanballs and breeds in places like West Coast National Park and Agulhas National Park. That photograph in question was by one of my old varsity friends, Michael Buckham. I'm not really a skilled photographer and don't have great photography equipment. So one or two places in the presentation, I've had to lean on photographs from others, but I always like to give credit to them. And Mike took that wonderful photograph of the black harrier. So as you sit on your deck, as you're in your unit at Agulhas National Park, these birds ghost out of nowhere and allow really opportunities to get some really nice photographs. But the bottom photographs are ones that I was able to take. And you can see a rock kestrel on the left-hand side bottom, and then a jackal buzzard on the right. And those birds are both using the SANParks accommodation as a vantage point, because the fanbos, the Strandveld there is so rich with rodents and lizards and reptiles and other sort of food supplies. So it's a wonderful place to look at them. Here's another in the center there. There's another fanball specialist, the Cape spurfowl. And that photograph was taken in the parking at the reception. Bontebok National Park. That's also not too far north of Agulhas. It's South Africa's smallest national park by a long way. And the reason it was proclaimed was to save the Bontebok antelope from extinction. So the sort of middle ground that you can see in the background, that is Renosterveld, part of the Fynbos biome. And most of Renosterveld has been used for agriculture, turned into wheat fields. So there's very little of it left, but there's a portion of it protected in a Gallis and in Bontebok National Park, important to save the Bontebok. But the park has other attractions from a birding point of view. You can see these Langeberg Mountains in the background. That's actually outside the park. There's a state forest there called Grootvadersbos, which is one of the closest forest habitats to Cape Town itself. But in this rest camp itself, which is called Langelsies Kraal, named after a famous African warrior queen who lived in the area about 200 years ago, there's been a whole lot of yellowwood trees that have been planted. So there's a number of birds that are migrating and moving down from the forest into the rest camp, and gives a wonderful opportunity to have close encounters there. So if I go back to that picture, what's also going to be important in the next slide is just out of sight there, this is the Breda River. There's a huge big reed bed that's used as a roosting place for many swallows and martin species that we'll talk about in a moment on the next slide. So Langelsies Kraal is a wonderful place to go to see swallows up close and personal. That photo, top left photo, doesn't really do it justice. I took that on my cell phone. It was about being there at dusk at the right time when there's an insect eruption, and suddenly you've got swarms, almost like a sort of locust swarm of swallows and swifts and martins that are feeding on this insect eruption just before it's dusk. But there's other swallows in the park. These bottom left-hand picture there are pearl-breasted swallows, and they're not normally a flock species. They're normally seen singly or in pairs. But there's some sweet thorn acacias. I know they've now not got a new name, but some sweet thorn there, just as you do the little sort of drive loop and just before you get back to Langelsies Kraal, but almost without fail, you can see quite large family groups of pearl-breasted swallow there. In the camp itself, see that lovely picture of a greater striped swallow. It was actually nesting below the braai facility, so it had a bit of a death wish, or maybe it liked the heat from the fire, but it had got its little mud nest. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the sort of little mud nests of the greater striped swallow, but that one was on underneath the braai at the deck of the unit I was staying in there. And then I mentioned some of the forest birds that come into the camp because of the yellowwoods that have been planted there. You can see Knysna and olive and cardinal woodpecker, 3 woodpeckers that you get in that camp. 2 are forest species, and the cardinal is more widespread and found in the savanna biome in the northern parts of the country as well. This one here is a female olive woodpecker, where I was able to get a nice little photograph of it in the camp itself. So yeah, a cracking little park, maybe small, but definitely worth a visit. My very first visit to the park was when I was still a student in the 1990s, because it's a great park for displaying or lecking bustards. Denham's bustards go and they sort of fluff themselves up and they sort of strut, and all the males try and compete for the attention of the female birds. So if Denham's bustard is on your hit list, it's a good park to go there. But there's also a lot of small tiny birds that at the right time of year when they're displaying, cloud testiculars, African quailfinch are some of the specials that can go there, and it's relatively close to Cape Town, probably about an hour and a half's drive, and some really nice birds to get there. Tankwa Karoo National Park has a big reputation in the birding world because a lot of the sort of karoo specials are easily found there. It's a very good park for Birchall's Corso. It's possibly the most accessible place to see Cape Eagle Owl, and Cape Eagle Owls are normally associated with mountainous regions of the country, but the ones in the Tankwa Karoo extend into the plains as well. You have to be careful because Cape Eagle Owl have orange eyes, and the smaller spotted eagle owl, which also occurs in the park, about 20% of those birds have orange eyes. So you can't do identity on eye color alone. You've got to look at the chest pattern. If it's a barred, it's going to be spotted eagle owl, but if it's got blotches on it, and generally a bigger bird is Cape Eagle Owl, and you can get some really nice up-close encounters but a lot of great arid birds. But one of the attractions of the park that was really put on the map in 2019, I think it was that reservoir you see in front of you in the top left. That's Kraal Dam. And it's this big water reservoir in this real arid heartland. So it attracts a number of unusual water birds every year, particularly in winter time. A lot of the wildfowl, the ducks and geese, come and sort of winter there. There's often a lot of stilts and pied avocets. Sometimes flamingos come and stake out there. But in 2019, this little bird here, this Eurasian shoveler, turned up there. And this is an example of what I was talking about earlier, reverse migration, where a bird that should go back to Europe sort of winters or our summertime in Central Africa, sort of Kenya, Tanzania, around there. It got its inner compass wrong and turned out that this dam in the Kruger, and birders from all over the country were flocking to see it and add it to their South African life list. So yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to go and see it. So I took that photograph off the Rare Bird Network News again. But yeah, a real feature. But this bottom right-hand image is also one of the birding attractions of the park. That's Kgalagadi Pass, one of the mountain passes that take you from the low-lying flat areas up into the mountains. And it's a real birding highlight. At the base, as you have those boulder-strewn slopes, you can look out for cinnamon-breasted warbler. And as you wind your way up the mountain pass, you're going to see things like Cape siskin, orange-breasted sunbird. And as you get to the sort of craggy mountain tops, you're going to have Cape rockjumper and sentinel rockjumper. And all 5 of those birds are South African endemics. So people travel from far and wide to try and get them on their life list. And then you might be wondering about this photograph of the swimming pool and the decks and what its significance is. Now, that's one of the units at Elandsberg Rest Camp, which is a rest camp in the park. And that's the celebratory scene of my 700th bird. Over a decade ago, I'm not much of a lister. I couldn't even tell you how many birds I've seen these days, but I did want to reach the landmark of 700. And on my first visit to Kruger, I was on 998, and I got I think I was in 997, and I got the Birchall's Corsair is 998, and the Makwa Warbler is 999. And for my 700th bird, I got a feeding family of Karoo aeromomelers. So that was the scene. You can see the celebratory drinks. I was there for work, so I couldn't indulge in anything too strong. But yeah, it's happy memories for me. Kruger, great place to visit. Now we come to the park that I currently call home. I've been here for 5 years, Garden Route National Park. And although it's called Garden Route National Park, it is in effect 3 parks. You've got 3 proclaimed parks. You've got the Wilderness National Park in the west with the Wilderness Lakes and the Swartfly Estuary. And then you've got the Knysna Lagoon. It's often erroneously referred to it as in fact an estuary. It's not a lagoon, and it's a proclaimed national park. And then you've got the Tsitsikamma section in the east of the park, with Storms River, Nature's Valley, and the world famous Otter Trail that links the two. And you'll see that there's that coastal marine section of the park too. But in the late 2000s, a whole lot of land that was previously under the custodianship of the Department of Forestry was transferred to SANParks. So that expanded the park considerably, and we then created this massive biosphere reserve, which includes large tracts of mountain fynbos, those sort of pale yellow areas, and the sort of light green areas are all indigenous forests. That was all added to the park. So the park now stretches from George, from the Sarsveld campus in the west, and those sort of western sections of forest fall under Wilderness National Park. Then your sort of central sections there, Harkerville, Jubilee, I think Jubilee Creek still falls under the wilderness section. Deep Valley, that's the section I was looking for. They all fall under the Knysna section of the park. And then in the east, you've got Soetkrol and Blauwkrans, those areas added to the Tsitsikamma section. So there's some wonderful birds there, as we saw on the map earlier. It's a combination of fynbos. And also, I didn't mention anything about the forest biome. It's South Africa's most relic biome. Most of our forest has been curtailed and cut back severely by the timber industry and industrialization. But there's little patches of forest still in the Southern Cape, some in the Eastern Cape, some in KwaZulu-Natal, and some up in Limpopo. Tiny little thing. It's just a little purple dot that's on the biome map I should have mentioned. But if you look at some of the bird species down there at the bottom, you've got Cape sugarbird there on a protea. That's one of our fynbos endemics. Sugarbirds are a very special species because they're one of the bird families that are uniquely South African. There's only two species, one Cape sugarbird found in the sort of mountains of the southwestern Cape. And then you've got the Gurney sugarbird that's found in the Drakensberg. And we'll talk a bit about that under Marakele National Park. But you've also got forest species there. That bird of prey there you see there is a forest buzzard, which is quite a tricky bird to find in most of the country, quite rare, but it's quite a common species in the garden route. Lots of them down here. Then that central photo, the blackbird with a big orange bill, is the enigmatic African oystercatcher. That's a near endemic species, and it's very well established here in the garden route, whether here on Knysna Estuary or along the sort of coastal parts of the Tsitsikamma section or the wilderness section. So a real favorite of the people traveling down here. And there's also a few rare birds that turn up here. So that bottom picture is an African pied wagtail. Now that's a common bird in the eastern parts of the country in places like Kruger National Park. But in the Western Cape, it's a rare vagrant. But yet there's some that are in residence here, and that's sort of right outside my office. That photo was taken on the old railway line here on Teeson Island. So as I said, 3 seconds of the park. If we start in the wilderness section, it's all about the freshwater lakes. And there's a series of bird hides, not all of which are accessible, but they give, when I say accessible to someone like me in a wheelchair, but that one, the malachite hide, in the wilderness section is accessible. So you see me going through the reeds. It takes you to the hide that overlooks the freshwater lake. And from a conservation point of view, it's also, those lakes are also Ramsar sites. They have internationally significant populations of red-knobbed coot, which you can see in the top right-hand corner there with its little red knobs on the ground. Also some of the grebe species, the great-crested grebe, bottom central, and the black-necked grebe, bottom left. It's also a really good area to come look at herons. Some of the resident herons like grey and purple heron, which you can see in that photograph there, and black-headed heron are quite common. But there's also herons that are rare in the Western Cape, like black heron and squacker heron and Goliath heron. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of birds that shouldn't turn up in the southern reaches of the country suddenly get their inner compass wrong. And that is a subtropical species that's found in places like Mapungubwe and the northern reaches of Kruger Park. It's a broad-billed roller, but one for the first time ever turned up in the Western Cape at Wilderness National Park in, I think, 2018, October, November. And again, that picture I had to steal from Trevor's Rare Bird Network News. The photo I took was a bit poor. So Michael Mason, a renowned photographer in South Africa, he took that wonderful picture, which I'm sure you'll all agree is fantastic. Then we come to the Knysna section of the park. So as I'm talking to you right now, I'm sitting in my office on Teeson Island, on the jetty there. And this is a view of the estuary. It's not a lagoon, like I said, although there is a lagoon within the estuary in this Bollard Bay section of the park. A lagoon is where the sea flows into a sort of an inlet area, whereas an estuary is a river mouth. So the Knysna River is what forms this estuary. And because of the heads, you've got this body of water where seawater and river water, fresh water, sort of mix and create this brackish environment. So yeah, there's some good birding to be seen on the estuary itself, but a lot of the sort of birding attractions in Knysna are areas outside the actual park, sort of private land. This Woodburn freshwater lake is private land on the periphery of the estuary. We have our SANParks boardwalks there at Brenton on Lake, but this road here that takes you down there to those boardwalks is an incredible road, because there's 7 species of sunbird that you can see from the fynbos at the top of the road down through the forests and then down to the bottom. And what's incredible about that is when the first South African Bird Atlas project was done in the 1980s, there were only 4 species of sunbird that were found in the garden route. But because of suburban gardens and people putting up sugar feeders, there's been a gradual westward extension of sunbird species in particular. So things like amethyst and grey and collared sunbird that weren't normally found in this part of the world have now supplemented the double-collared, greater double-collared and southern double-collared, orange-breasted and malachite sunbirds that have always occurred in this area. Another great place to visit when visiting Knysna is Coney Glen, and there's some SANParks presence there, but there's cliffs there, and there's a very obliging pair of peregrines that allow photographers to get really impressive photographs, and they've successfully raised broods the last 5 years since I've been in Knysna, and yeah, well-known place to visit. Some other Knysna hotspots, if you're driving from Knysna towards the Tsitsikamma section, towards Plettenberg Bay, you go past Harkerville and the Garden of Eden, which is on the N2. There's a little wheelchair-friendly boardwalk through the forest there, and that's a wonderful opportunity to have close sightings of things like grey cuckoo shrike, Rena trogon, white-starred robin, lemon dove. And this little guy here, which is the ruddy phase of the olive bushwright. In the northeastern sections of the country where that bird is found, they tend to be the olive phase of that bird. The ruddy phase looks almost like a different species, but it's not. And then you can't talk about birds in Knysna without pointing out that it's the only town in the world that has not just 1 or 2, but 3 bird species named after the town. So you've got the Knysna luri or Knysna turako that everyone knows, a charismatic species, quite easy to see in people's gardens and in forested areas of the park. But there's also the Knysna woodpecker, which is here in the central picture. Again, that's not one of my own photographs. My brother Phil, he took that picture, and ironically not in Garden Route National Park. He took that picture in Addo Elephant in the Inyati section of that park. But the third bird that has the name Knysna attached to it is the Knysna warbler, and it's a skulker. It's a bird that really doesn't like to be seen out in the open. So I've got a creek next to our house, and this bird sings all day and all night from about July, August, all the way through to December. But to get it out in the open is almost impossible. So I'm sure many of you will laugh at that picture of, you can just make out the shape of the bird, its head, its beak singing away there. But it's very hard to get a nice distinctive photograph of the Knysna warbler. Then the Tsitsikamma section of the park. I mentioned earlier, you've got the Storms River section in the east of Tsitsikamma, and then you've got Nature's Valley in the west. And I think Nature's Valley is perhaps slightly better for birds. This is the Kruger River estuary, which is at Nature's Valley. There's the town of Nature's Valley, which is just outside the park. And there's the Nature's Valley Rest Camp, which is obviously in the park. So the Kruger River estuary flows there, and it's a good place to look for African finfoot, half-collared kingfisher. And then on the estuary, whiskered terns breed there. There's some good birding to be seen there, lots of good forest birds. There's another boardwalk, much like the one in the Garden of Eden that we've just spoken about, where you get into the forest and see similar sort of species to the ones I've just mentioned. I mentioned half-collared kingfisher down on the Kruger River. You can get to see that there. Now, this bird here in the bottom right-hand corner, that photograph was taken by my colleague, Dries de Wet, who is also a bird and general wildlife enthusiast. He's got a wonderful blog called De Wet's Wild. If you go and Google that, you can see some of his stunning photographs. But he took that photograph And it reminded me so much of one of my early experiences in South Africa. As Willie mentioned in the introduction, I was born in Northern Ireland, and my first summer in South Africa, my grandparents flew out from Ireland to join us, and we hired one of those auto caravans, those sort of Winnebago type vehicles, and we drove and did a tour of the country and went to sort of many places that I haven't been to since. But we spent 5 days in Storms River doing all the walks, and we had one of the campsites that was sort of in the sort of on the edge of the forest. And you know, we hadn't, as newcomers to South Africa, we were just getting used to the concept of a braai. Of course, over in Ireland they talk of a barbecue. I don't really know what they're doing, but in South Africa, a braai. And what's amazing is birds love braais, not when the braai is hot, but because there's all gristle and fat from the meat there. You'll often find bird species coming and looking for titbits. And these chorister robin chats, which you can see are a real beautiful species, would come out of the forest and sort of pick on the braais. So I asked Dries if I could use his photograph because it was so synonymous with my first experience of Storms River. Now that top photograph there is actually a video, and unfortunately it won't play for you, but you'll have to take my word for it. It was taken by a good friend of mine, Rowan Goller. His family have got a house in Nature's Valley, and they come here regularly, and he's a big trail runner, and he was doing one of the trail runs, and a little fynbos specialist called a Victorine's warbler jumped out at him, and he took his cell phone out and he took this video of this bird, which is normally a skulking shy species, much like the Knysna warbler I've just shown you, bouncing around out in the open. But unfortunately, the video won't play. But let's move on. Kruger National Park, as the name suggests, is all about the karoo, which is in Arab scrubland. So you're looking at Arab bird species. And there's 8 species of South African birds that have karoo in its species name. So karoo thrush, karoo prinia, they're quite widespread, aren't only limited to the karoo. Then you've got things like karoo scrub robin, karoo chat, karoo eramomela, which I mentioned as my 700th bird, karoo korhaan, karoo lark, and karoo longbill lark, which are all birds that you come to the karoo to find. And there's a number of other karoo specialists that don't have the name karoo, and it's a great place to get close to these species. One of the best places when you go there to go is the campsite, the award-winning Karoo Rest campsite, because you can walk around and the birds have become quite habituated. You can get really close to them. There's also the boardwalk to the Park Interpretation Center at Oskuur, just next to the campsite. And that's really nice. You see you're moving through a dry riverbed and you're sort of at eyeline with a lot of these karoo specials. So I was able to get that photo of a male dusky sunbird in breeding plumage. But another thing was a road up the Klipspringer Pass, a wonderful opportunity. At the top of the pass, there's an area, sort of nest of a pair of Verou's eagle. So there's a little get out point where you can sort of go and scan for those. But it's also a really good place to get to grips with this little South African endemic, the black-headed canary, which I'm sure you'll all agree is a beautiful little species. Bottom right there, that's a fairy flycatcher. So again, one of my brother Phil's pictures that he took in the campsite itself. Yeah, so again, ties back to what I was saying earlier, use campsites and boardwalks to get close to birds. Kamdaboo National Park, I was actually there last week. We've just opened up the Friends of the Parks, Granat, and the Mountain Zebra Honorary Rangers, and Machali's Honorary Rangers helped fund a new boardwalk at this very site that you can see. That's the viewpoint of the Valley of Desolation. And yeah, I haven't done too much birding in the park itself, but there is a thriving birding community. The park surrounds the town of Graafrenet, and there's a number of residents of that town that are avid birders, and every few weeks you'll see some rare bird that they've seen posted on the Rare Bird Network news. Some of the attractions of birding in the park, there's a huge big reservoir, much like the one in Tankwa Karoo. It's called Nkweba Dam, and you can see in that top left-hand photograph, it was quite full, and a lot of unusual water birds not associated with the crew will turn up there. Things like pelicans and Goliath herons and flamingos will sometimes turn up there. There's usually Caspian terns in attendance. But my first visit to the park, which was 4 years ago, there was absolutely no water in the dam. And you can see there's this huge big viewing platform, lookout point, which was a bit redundant because there was no water in it. But when I was there last week, I can report that there was a fair bit of water. So the situation was a lot healthier. It's a great park for bustards. I mentioned Denham's bustard earlier when talking about Boorteboek National Park, but this one's got Denham's bustard, it's got Corey bustard, and it's got this one here, the Ludwig's bustard. Good park for there. And the picture in the bottom, the photograph in the bottom right-hand section was not actually taken in the park, but about 10 kilometers outside the park on the road from Kamdaboo to Mountain Zebra, which is, I think, about 70 kilometers away. And what's really nice about those two parks is they're earmarked for another sort of biosphere reserve, much like I spoke about at Garden Route National Park, where they're trying to create a sort of conservation corridor where your areas of national park and then partnering with the local landowners to create a sort of area where the animals can move freely between the two parks. So that's those blue korans, another South African endemic. They were just at the side of the road, so I stopped my car quickly when I saw them and took a photograph. So they'll also be in the area, probably found in both parks, a nice special South African species. So we come to Mountain Zebra National Park. So I haven't done much birding in Kamdaboo, but I've done a lot of birding in Mountain Zebra. I've worked in quite a few projects there over the years. A wonderful park. It's got a low-lying section, and then it's got a section in the mountains where you can get to grips with Drakensberg rock jumper. We mentioned the Cape rock jumper, one of the endemic specials of some of the mountainous areas in the Cape parks. But here you can get to grips with Drakensberg rock jumper. But it's got a whole lot more birding attractions aside. One of the real features of the park, if you get there in November, December, when it's breeding season, it's probably one of the best places in the world for lark species. You get up onto that sort of high grassland plateau, you're going to have breeding and displaying eastern clapper larks, eastern longbill larks, like this top right-hand photo there, large-bill larks, like that bottom right-hand photo there. There'll be spike-heel larks, red-capped larks, melodious larks, just a whole lark extravaganza. Really is worthwhile. And there's a lot of other species that will be in breeding display at the same time as well. But like I mentioned earlier on, make use of the rest camps. The rest camp, particularly the new units, the new chalets in the sort of upper part of Mountain Zebra Rest Camp, some wonderful birding opportunity. You'll get mixed feeding flocks of Cape bunting top there, and then cinnamon-breasted rock bunting bottom there. The sort of two will interact quite closely. There'll also be things like southern chagra, fairy flycatcher, fiscal flycatcher, white-browed sparrowweaver, lots of good species. Then if you go for a drive in the sort of lower plain section of the park, you can have the unique opportunity. I don't know if you can make it out here, but you see those two birds there, South Africa's national bird, the blue crane, and there over there on the right-hand side of the picture, South Africa's national mammal, the springbuck. So you're not often going to have a binocular view where you've got national bird and national animal in the same photograph. So that was quite special. And then this bottom left-hand photo was something that when I saw and took this photograph, I didn't realize its significance, but you might see there's that little yellow throat patch there. Now that's a yellow-throated Petronia. And the throat patch is not a usual field characteristic. And in fact, I didn't notice it when I saw the bird live. It was only when I downloaded the photograph that I saw that the yellow throat patch was quite distinct. So I thought that was a little curiosity that would be worth including with the birds about mountain zebra. Addo Elephant. So I mentioned earlier that it's set in Albany thicket, but it's at a transition. And Albany is the most habitat diverse park on the planet. You've got the Albany thicket biome, then away to the sort of right-hand side of this photograph, you get into the Zuurberg Mountains, where there's There's remnants of fynbos biome and grassland biome. And then over the other side of the mountain in the Darlington section of the park, you're in the Nama Karoo biome. You've also got forest biome in the Zuurberg Mountains and at Alexandria and the sort of eastern parts of the park. Then you've got that woody Cape section where you've got a representation of the Indian Ocean coastal belt that's sort of synonymous with the eastern seafront of KwaZulu-Natal. You've also got the oceanic islands in the bay itself. So you've got this wonderful diversity. So there's not a great degree of things that are found only in Addo. It tends to share it with other parts of the country. But you've got a wonderful sort of mixture of different species. So it's a wonderful place to visit. Some of the attractions, one of the most dominant species as you wake up in the morning, if you're staying at Addo Rest Camp, is the bokmakeri, which sings its lungs out with its wonderful duetting song. There's one on top of a speckboom bush. You've got a lot of succulent aloes in the rest camp itself, so you'll have things like greater double-collared, again, singing its lungs out. And if you go to one of the picnic sites in the sort of game viewing area, Jack's picnic site, you'll probably get harassed by some red-necked spurfowl, like this one here. They become very tame and habituated and allow for sort of good photographs. One of the birding hotspots to go visit while you're there is to try and make yourself, if you're staying at Matiaweni Rest Camp, go down into the Colchester section of the park at the end of the Woody Cape section, get to the Sundays River mouth. It's a place where Damara tern, one of our sort of near endemic coastal birds, they breed. Good place to see them. And then you can see in the background of that photograph, there's some coastal islands. That's Bird Island and the St. Croix Island group. And those are important breeding destinations for African penguin, Cape gannet, rosette tern. And then every year they turn up a lot of special rare seabirds, bridal terns, red-footed boobies, things that wouldn't normally be there. Currently, the island is a restricted area, but there are plans afoot to create ecotourism trails out to the island, and that'll be a wonderful opportunity for birders to see some real special stuff. And we're moving out of the Eastern Cape now into the Northern Cape, into some of our arid parks. Bang in the central of the country, near the city of Kimberley, is Makala National Park. And it's a wonderful meeting point of your Nama Karoo, your arid savanna, and your grasslands. So although it's a good sort of stopover point for people traveling from the interior to the coast or vice versa, it's a real destination in its own right, and it's worth spending 2 or 3 nights there to explore the park a lot more fully. So you've got some wonderful birding opportunity, and you can see top right hand there's a bird hide. That's one of the dams called Stoff Dam, that our West Rand Honorary Rangers use some of the funds from the Kruger birding weekends that they organize to plow back into some of the other parks, and they constructed that dam. And you can see that we were very honored to have Her Royal Highness, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II came out to open the hide. That is in fact one of the honorary rangers. I know who she is. She knows who she is, but I won't embarrass her in public. But some great birding there at the rest camp at Mosu Lodge. There's a resident pair of African pygmy falcons, Africa's smallest bird of prey. That's the female bird there with the lovely chestnut back. I mentioned in the introduction that birds are attracted to water. So at Hackenstead campsite, there's a female violet-eared waxbill that's looking for water in one of the drains at the sort of ablution facility there. It's a great park for courses, particularly double-banded courser, whether it's on the grass plains around Lilydale Rest Camp in the north of the park or around the acacia loops near Mosu Lodge. Great opportunity to see and photograph that species. And if you find a bird party in the acacia part of the park, it's likely to include the ashy tit, one of those enigmatic busy little species that replaces, if you find a bird party is sort of a mixed feeding flock of all different species. They sort of clump together for their protection. Great way to bird if you stop and hit a bird party. That gets replaced in the savanna biome in places like Kruger and Mapungubwe by the southern black tit. but in the sort of drier, arid central regions of the country, you've got the ashy tit. And moving a little further north, you get to Kgalagadi Falls National Park on the Orange River, where Orange River cascades through the sort of gorge, and it's called Kgalagadi, means the place of great noise. It's a wonderful cascade of huge volume of water. But from a birding point of view, you want to go to the viewing decks, which have been made wheelchair friendly. Those platforms, great place to scan for arid specialists like Bradfield swift, and there's peregrine falcons as well that nest there. Scan for them. Also, black stork breed in the gorge, so another one to look out for. Another special visiting Kgalagadi is the Orange River white-eye. It differs from the Cape white-eye and yellow white-eye that are common in other parts of the country by that lovely cinnamon-colored underparts. Yeah, beautiful as opposed to the Cape white-eye and yellow white-eye. They've got grey or yellow underparts. There's also a bird hide in the rest camp there, which is great, and a number of interesting species not normally associated with arid environments turn up in that rest camp and have that bird hide. Things that may be common in other parts of the country but are rare birds in the Northern Cape. Yeah, so definitely worth visiting from a birding point of view. Namakwa National Park, most people will know for the Namakwa daisies, the wonderful flower displays that you get in August and September. But it's a great park, an underexplored park from a birding point of view. In fact, the original section of the park, the Skilpad section, if you go to the sort of reception there and ask for the park's bird list, they only give you a list of the interior section of the park. But in the 2000s, the park was expanded to the Atlantic Ocean, to the cold Benguela current that goes there. And there's two rivers, there's the Kruger River and the Spook River, which are stopover destinations for those Palearctic waders that I was telling you about that come and sort of winter in Langabon Lagoon and West Coast National Park, and at places like the Berg River estuary at Velddrif. But they'll stop over at these places, and there's two ramshackle hides on those rivers that we inherited when the park was proclaimed that need to sort of be done up. That's maybe an honorary ranger project that can be done, making them accessible to all people, because currently they're certainly not wheelchair friendly. But there's the more eyes and more birders we get into that part of the country, there's going to be some real special stuff that turns up there. But wow, look at that view, that sort of ostrich family, the male bird in black, the sort of female bird in brown, and all those little ostrich chicks. And then you've got the mighty Atlantic Ocean in the background. Another South African endemic is the bank cormorant, and it's sort of at the northern reaches of its range. It's a special species that you can see along the coastline there. But if you're staying in the sort of accommodation at Skilpad, and you're there sort of at the right time of year and wake up, you're going in the early morning, you're going to hear the cough of the southern black coran, which you can see there, and hear the displays of the Cape clapperlark. It's a wonderful way to serenade the day, much better than any alarm clock. Richtersveld, one of our transfrontier parks, on the sort of border with Namibia on the Orange River. I have only been to this park once, so I don't have too much birding experience, but I did have a wonderful time when I was there. But I'm sure there's people who know the area a lot better than me. I've neglected to mention some of the birding talks that BirdLife South Africa enlisted in, which you can find on the webinar pages of our website. I know Garden Route, Mike Bridgeford, local birding expert, did a great talk on garden route birding. And some of the other parks I've neglected to mention, Mountain Zebra, Wesley Gush did a wonderful presentation there. Addo, Daniel Dankford did a wonderful webinar there, but they are available on our website. If you go to our birding pages or to the webinar pages, you'll be able to find links to those talks, which go into much more detail about the parks. And now I'm just sort of giving a quick run through, talking very quickly, stumbling over my words. It's just to whet your appetite and let you all sense that birding hiss. But this is the view from Namibia coming back to South Africa. There's the sort of the punt that sort of takes people between the two countries. But yeah, a lot of birds focused on the river. some of the birds you can expect to see there. I remember seeing these beautiful rosy-faced lovebirds when I was there. And then you can see these top 3 pictures. The photographs are a lot more vivid than most of my photographs. They were actually taken by SANParks then photographer Eric Reisinger, one of my former colleagues. He's retired now. The pale-winged starling is very prominent in the park, different to the red-winged starling, got that lovely pale eye. There's another bird on a briar, that's an acacia-pied barbet. It's a fruit eater, so it shouldn't be looking for titbits, but they're attracted to the sort of little gristle that you get on briars. And that bottom left-hand one there is an African red-eyed bulbul, one of the bulbul species that is found in different parts of the country. Down in the Fynbos region, you've got the Cape bulbul, and then in the eastern parts of the country, you've got the dark-capped or black-eyed bulbul. Kgalagadi Transfrontier Park. Don't have to go into too much detail. Albert Fruneman did a wonderful webinar on photography and birds of the Kgalagadi that you can look up. But some things he didn't mention, he didn't talk because it hadn't been opened yet, was the Kgalagadi Raptor Center at Mata Mata Rest Camp. Takes you through all the various raptors that are found in the park and gives you little insight and access information on what raptors can be found there. It really is world renowned for its raptor activity. It's eagles, it's goshawks, it's falcons, it's owls, it's vultures, it's secretary birds, it's pygmy falcons. Really is a special place. But one of my real highlights of going to the Kgalagadi is that you're in such a stark, barren, arid environment. So everything's mostly drab and camouflaged, but you've got a number of birds that have really bright colors and become the jewels of the Kgalagadi. So you've got a picture of a crimson-breasted shrike there. And that picture really doesn't do it justice, because photographs and paintings of that species compared to real life, the color just cannot be captured in the display. So you've really got to go to a park like that to sort of experience it firsthand. Then every day you've got the sandgrouse that fly out of the dunes, and they go and quench their thirst and soak their feathers, and then fly back to their fledglings in the dunes in that harsh sun-soaked environment. It's an amazing thing. And 2 species that you get in the park, the namakwa arrives earlier at the waterholes, but if you wait a couple of hours, then the birchall sandgrouse comes and does the same. Those are the 2 things. That little photograph of the owl in daylight, it's a pearl-spotted owlet. It's again one of my brother's photographs. He was there with his family not so long ago, and they got that lovely. It's got a photo. It's a little bird with attitude and generally makes a lot of noise with its little daytime whistles. Beautiful species. And that top right picture is again rating the Rare Bird Network news of Trevor Hardacre. That was South Africa's first ever rosy starling that mysteriously was found in the park. There's a lot of rare birds that pitch up at the park, particularly after heavy rains. Often water birds that shouldn't be found in a sort of semi-desert environment that turn up there, herons and crakes and painted snipes, things like that. So yeah, it's a real, whether you go there in the dry season or the wet season, you're going to see some real spectacular birds. Golden Gate Highlands National Park. Again, before I forget, let me make reference to the wonderful webinar that Free State birding expert Rick Nuttall did on this park. He'll go into a lot more details of some of the birds you can see there, but you can see it set in high altitude grassland. And again, it's a park that we have to pay homage to the efforts of the honorary rangers. There's a vulture hide there that was created and funded by the Free State and KwaZulu-Natal honorary ranger groups. And it's up a steep hill, but it's got a wonderful paved pathway, so wheelchairs and prams and things like that can get to experience the hide. There's the view, the central pictures, the lookout from the hide, and they're quite regular with putting down carcasses and Cape vultures, and the highly endangered bearded vulture will come down and feed alongside white-necked ravens, and there'll be jackal nipping around there too. So a real feature of the park that we have to sort of thank the honorary rangers for. But also other attractions around the Golden Gate Hotel. Another South African endemic, the southern bald ibis, can often be seen on the lawns of the hotel. Then you've got the ground woodpecker, another South African endemic, that will come into the rest camps of Glen Rhiannon and Brandwag. Yeah, so not a great photo, but a good part of the world to go and see that species. And then being there in summertime is a real treat because you've got all the grassland species that are in breeding plumage. You've got your long-tailed widow bird that you can see here. There's a number of other widow and bishop species that you'll see. They'll be displaying and breeding cisticolas, those little LBJs that in summertime the air is alive with their songs. So things like wing-snapping cisticola, wailing cisticola, lazy cisticola, cloud cisticola, all possible to get up close and personal with them in Golden Gate National Park. Then we come to the Waterberg in Limpopo province. One of my favorite parks is Marikela National Park because you've got such a habitat transition. You've got low-lying areas, not shown in this picture, where you've got your arid savanna from the west meets the more sort of moist savanna of the east. So you get a lot of closely related species that should be separated that occur alongside each other. So things like your pied babbler, your southern pied babbler from the west meets the Aramarked babbler from the east. Your Kalahari scrub robin from the west meets your white-browed scrub robin from the east. Shaft-tailed whiter from the west, pen-tailed whiter from the east. Your crimson-breasted shrike, which we looked at in Kgalagadi just now, from the west, and your southern boo-boos from the east. So a lot of sort of blending together. There's also some specials down in the low-lying area, things like barred wren warbler, yellow-throated sandgrouse, great sparrow. Marikela is a great park to see those species. But the real feature is getting into the mountains, and you get to see why it's called the Waterberg. There's these sort of huge flay areas that you only get to see when you're sort of up above in the mountain tops. But one of South Africa's largest Cape vulture colonies, a highly endangered vulture species. All vultures are endangered all around the world, some more than others. And one of South Africa's largest breeding colonies is set in the park. And there's a place called Lenong, which is Tswana for vulture view, I think. And we have this wonderful road. I spoke of roads earlier. Now, at the top of the Waterberg Massif, you've got these communication towers, a Centec tower, there's a defense, South African Defence Force tower, and there's also a Telkom tower. And these have to be serviced. So all those entities help provide this little tar road that takes you from the low-lying areas of the park up to the top of the mountain. And what's really nice, once you're up there amongst the towers, you can actually get out of your vehicle and walk around, because in theory, the elephants and lion and other dangerous animals that you'll find in the low-lying sections shouldn't be up there. Although I have to say, I have seen elephant dung dangerously close to the top. But you get up there and you're in another world. It's like being in the Drakensberg. So there's a number of species that you wouldn't associate with the western parts of Limpopo province, like this buff-streaked chat, which is a recognized Drakensberg species, but there's others. There's Gurney sugarbird, there's Malachite sunbird, Swee waxbill, Cape bunting, these sort of amazing birds. And the amazing thing about mountain birds is they seem to lose their fear of humans and become very inquisitive. So if you drive up there and park and you're about to have a picnic, these birds will sort of suddenly be all around you and pose for really good photographs. On the left-hand side there's a pied babbler, the sort of western species equivalent of the Aramarked babbler, which you see there on the right. Then I want to mention this really special spot. As you're doing that drive that I was telling you about, just before you hit the steep incline up to the top of the mountain, there's a little copse of trees. And I reckon it's the best place in the country to get good close sightings of Shelley's francolin. There always seems to be a covey of Shelley's francolin there. So I often stop there and you can see a real photographic amateur like myself can get a nice close photograph. And then one day when I was there, very unexpectedly, a little African pygmy kingfisher jumped out. So I always expect the unexpected with birds. And that's the beautiful thing about our parks. There's many places where we can have those close encounters. Then we come to Mapungubwe, and I really can't enthuse too much about that. It's got a huge reputation. It's a relatively small park. It's at the sort of meeting point of the three countries, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. It's got a wonderful African heritage. And then when the European colonial powers came to the country, they also had a presence in the area. So a wonderful, rich history tapestry. But from a birding point of view, it's just amazing. So you're in the Limpopo Basin, you're in Limpopo floodplain that in wet years becomes like a miniature Okavango. You've got all these subtropical species that coming in from Botswana and Zimbabwe. And you've also, like Marakele, got sort of your east and west species. So there's a lot of species that you found there that are easier to see than places further east, like Kruger Park. So just absolutely, you've got 400 bird species in a relatively small area, which is incredible, and some wonderful facility to see there. The park itself is split into two. It's got an eastern section and a western section. The eastern section has got the Mapungubwe Interpretation Center, the Confluence, and the treetop boardwalk that you can see there, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. It's got Liokwe campsite and Vembi Trails camp. The western section has got the Limpopo tented camp. It's got Mizzou campsite. It's got the what's that, the hide called? I better remember because I'm about to talk about it. Malutswa hide, which is really a fantastic spot. But let me first talk about the treetop boardwalk. Getting there at dawn is a real spiritual experience because you'll be at eye level with the birds, and you'll have some nocturnal species like African barred owlet or Pell's fishing owl that you can see on the right there, sort of retiring and starting to roost. You'll see the owlets go into their nesting holes and possibly see that big ginger bird, which is the sort of holy grail of so many birders. That particular photograph was taken by Professor Roy Ballantyne, one of our tourism research partners from the University of Queensland. He is an ex-Cape Townian South African, now living in Australia, but he was doing work with our guides in the park, helping sort of train and equip them, and he got that marvelous shot. The guides in the park know where the birds roost, and if you make requests at reception and get onto one of the sort of walks in the park, they can take you to where the birds roost. But getting back to the sort of boardwalk, if you're there at dawn, you've got all the sort of daytime species waking up. So you'll have things like retzes and white-crested helmet shrikes, meave starlings, several species of cuckoo and kingfisher and bee-eater, all at eye level. They sort of don't associate any danger from the humans. Mayor's parrot is another special to get along that boardwalk. Several species of woodpecker, honeyguide, barbet, lots of birds of prey species sort of ghosting through the trees. It really is a wonderful experience. It's maybe not quite as good as it was when it was first constructed. The elephants have really sort of hammered the understory of the riverine forest there. And unfortunately, the local baboon troop has taken to roosting on the boardwalk. They've worked out that it's much safer there than in the trees themselves. So every morning you've got to dodge baboon feces, and the park has really got its work cut out, and they have to send sort of sweeping parties once or twice a week. But yeah, let's move out of the eastern section of the park to the western section. That bird hide, Malutswa hide, I rate it as my favorite hide in the whole of SANParks. In the dry season, it's great for game. It's like a magnet, and game comes far and wide. But in wet years, when it's in flood, it's like a mini Okavango. There'll be African fish eagles, there'll be gallinules, there'll be crakes, there'll be Patton coals, all sort of moving through there. If you look closely there, you will see there's a greater painted snipe there and a lesser moorhen there. There'll be grey-crowned cranes, there'll be ducks and geese and waterfowl, there'll be wadder species, all so close. It's a complete mind explosion of birds. It really is wonderful. So if it's a wet season, try and get there March, April, and you'll have some wonderful birding experiences. But even in the dry season, there's a lot of good birding to be had there. A wonderful park to visit. And finally, last but not least, we come to Kruger. And I'm sure most of you have your own Kruger experiences. Kruger birding is wonderful throughout, but there's certain areas that are maybe a little bit better than others. So let me share some of my favorites just in terms of the species. You've got some southern carmine beaters, an adult there, juvenile plumage there. Then you've got some wattled starlings, a male in breeding plumage, and a female there, and of course a plain zebra down beneath them there. But yeah, Kruger, there's a map of Kruger. It has some real biodiversity hotspots, and you'll see it on the map. And these have real rich birding return. So at the top there, you've got the Porphyry section of the park with Punta Maria, Porphyry, the Northern Plains, some wonderful birding opportunity there. Then the sort of central part of the park, you've got the confluence of the Olifants and Letaba rivers. You've got the Olifants Rest Camp, Letaba Rest Camp, good place to stay and do birding. But also if you get on the Olifants Trails Camp, you can maybe get into the Olifants Gorge or Bangu Gorge, which are real special spots where some rarities turn up. You've got the Lubombo Hills along the sort of eastern boundary of the park between South Africa and Mozambique. So Satara and Lawasabi are sort of accessing this section of the park, Mwanetsi, and Crocodile Bridge as well. Those are good areas to sort of bird in the park there. Then in the southwestern section of the park, you've got Pretoria, Skorpa, and Bergendal, and they've got sort of a rich biodiversity value sensitivity there, and some special species will be found there and nowhere else in the park. But basically, good birding is found throughout the park. You're not going to be disappointed, but those are some special spots. And just to sort of finish up for the park and some of my favorite Kruger spots. The far northern gems, pretty much similar to Mapungubwe. You've got the Limpopo Basin feeding species there. You've got the Soutpansberg mountain range feeding some of those species into the park there. And then across the border from Mozambique and Zimbabwe, you've got species that you won't find in other parts of South Africa. So you've got real pandemonium at Porphyry. And Porphyry is quite a large area. It goes from the sort of eastern bound border post into Mozambique through to the sort of Porphyry Gate in the west. That's a sort of a distance of about 30-40 kilometers. So we're talking that much wide, and then about sort of 10 kilometers deep in the Makuleke section of the park. It really is wonderful there. You've got the Mahoney Magic. That's the loop around Punta Maria Rest Camp, but it's set in Sandveld, and there's birds there. Some of these sort of Miyombo specials from Zimbabwe, things like southern hyliota, black-eared seed eater, white-breasted cuckoo strike, African golden oriole, found there more easy than anywhere else in South Africa. Accommodation for avi-tourists going to that part of the park. Punta Maria Camp has a lot of accommodation. There's Porphyry Border Camp, and it's only got 3 units, so you would tend to book out the entire camp. There's the Inyala Trails Camp, and the guides at Inyala Trails Camp are wonderful birders. So if you want to see things like the spine-tails or the racket-tailed rollers, they can take you into Lana Gorge, real special locations. And in the Makuleke concessions, there's some non-SANParks run concessions that offer great birding destinations as well. And they've also got really super guides there. But if you really are keen to get into that section of the park, I've really got to talk up the Punda Extreme Birding Weekends that the West Rand Honorary Rangers offer. And they're called Extreme Birding Weekends because you're going to be birding on the Saturday, you'll be birding from 2 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night. You'll be out in the vehicles and you'll think, that sounds impossible, I can't go that long. But birding adrenaline is a wonderful thing. And when you're on a truck with maybe 6 or 8 other birders and sort of knowledgeable guides, the enthusiasm, the gees, and maybe the presence of the odd Red Bull will get you through the day, and you're going to see some amazing stuff. It's the only way to get into the Nwambia Sandveld and see specials there like pink-throated twin spot, Rud's Palace, fawn-colored lark, birds that you will find nowhere else in the park, and some other specials, crested guinea fowl, gorgeous bushshrike, shaft-tailed white-eye, some real specials there. And you'll also get to Porphyry at dawn, so excellent chance of seeing Pel's fishing owl and a whole lot of other nocturnal birds, 3-banded corsair, and many other owl and nightjar and corsair species. It really is a special experience. So I really encourage that. You should be able to get all the detail off the SANParks Honorary Rangers website. The Skukuza Nursery and Wetland Boardwalk. So Skukuza is the park's capital, a much busier camp. There's a lot of accommodation, a lot more visited. People will know that part of the park a lot better. And it's a wonderful place to go and The camp itself is great, but the Skukuza Nursery and Wetland Boardwalk is a real special spot. You'll have a combination of thicket species alongside flea species. But in wintertime, you've got a lot of birds from the sort of interior mountains that move down the Sabi River and into the park and spend the winter there in the nursery. So birds like grey cuckoo-shrike and some of the robin chats, chorister robin chat, white-starred robin, birds that are not normally associated with the park will sort of end up there and have a presence. It's quite remarkable how they sort of look to escape the cold. But then you'll also have coastal birds pushing up, birds normally associated with the KwaZulu-Natal coastline, things like golden rump tinkerbird, black-throated wattle-eye, and purple-banded sunbird will also have a presence in that nursery. So it's a real good spot for seeing sort of interesting birds, different birds in the park. Tropic of Capricorn Loop in the sort of northern section around Mopani Rest Camp is a wonderful area. The Tihongonyeni Windmill on the Tropic of Capricorn Loop is a great place for seeing things like Caspian plovers and a lot of the sort of Kori bustards, Senegal lapwing, some of the sparrowlarks, and other sort of dry arid birds that are maybe difficult to encounter in the sort of more sort of thornfelt sections of the park. So really good birding there. Greater kestrel, a rare bird in the park, is often seen close to that windmill. And you move a little further south to get into the Nshawu Pans, and they've got some wonderful birding. If it's a flood year, then it's probably the best place in the park to see black kukul. Also very good for rufous-winged cisticola, a real localized special bird. And then the Mooiplaas Windmill, as you make your way back to Mopani Camp, is great for the migrant harriers, your pallid and Montague's harrier, also for the Caspian plovers, and the rufous-winged cisticola is also sometimes seen there. And one of my favorite drives in the park is quite a sort of popular drive. It's the drive from Lower Sabi to Chukwan, and the reason I like it so much is because of the habitat transition. So you start off on that low-level bridge that many of you will know well, so you get really close encounters with water birds and great photography opportunities. Then you'll move a little further north and you'll have the impressive Munche Hill on your right and Munche Stream or Munche Creek on your left, and there's sort of a dichotomy of birds between those two features. Then you move into grassland plains up to Nkumbu and Kumba Hill, where you're going to see things like your yellow-throated longclaws, your black-bellied bustards, your Senegal lapwings, your fan-tailed widow birds. So grassland species, not sort of associated as much with Kruger or some of the sort of woodland species that you'll be more familiar with. Then as you get into the sort of Nkumba Hill itself, it becomes much denser thickets, and you're going to start seeing things like a Southern African endemic, the white-throated robin chat, the mocking cliff chat is another good bird that you'll see there, particularly from the sort of lookout point. It's a good place to scan for raptors and scan the surrounding veld for ostriches and bustards, some of the larger birds and birds of prey that you're going to be seeing there. And then as you descend down the other side towards Chukwan, the thornfelt becomes a lot drier. It's a very arid part of the park, and you're going to have things that aren't normal Kruger birds, the more Kgalagadi birds. It's one of the few nesting places of white-browed sparrow weaver and scaly feathered weaver that are not normal Kruger birds. So yeah, one of the real special drives to do. And then I need to sort of mention a place that I'm sure a lot of you will know, Leeuwpan or Lion Pan. It's good at all times of year, pretty much like Malutswa Hide in Mapungubwe. But when it's in wet years, it becomes like a mini Okavango, and you get things like pygmy geese and all these crakes and ducks and gallinules and moorhens that are in the wetland there. That is a real opportunity to see them at close quarters. Fantastic. So yeah, just some pictures of my favorite spots in Kruger. There's Pufuri picnic site. Some great birding to be had there. You'll never be disappointed. There's the Skukuza Wetland Boardwalk, which is a wonderful place. The only place in the park that I've seen a flufftail is on that boardwalk. There's a picture from Leeuwpan, a pair of pygmy geese. special spot. There's the Honganyani windmill on the Capricorn Loop in Kruger. So yeah, those are 4 of my little favorite parts of the park. And just to mention, before I leave Kruger, Duncan McKenzie did an amazing webinar going into a lot more detail than I've gone into. So you can listen or watch his presentation. Again, the link is on our website. And yeah, I'm sure be thrilled to hear that we've come to the end. And I hope that this presentation will inspire the audience to take off to one or more of South Africa's national parks. And I'd like to end with another takeoff of one of my favorite photos I've ever taken in a national park, because you just don't know what you're going to see taking off. So that's a Montagu's harrier that I came across near Babalala picnic site in Northern Kruger Park. And it was just uncharacteristically sifting its way through some elephant dung. And I just sort of caught that photo as it took off. And yeah, rare bird, a rare visitor from the Northern Hemisphere. And I love that photo. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Chris. You did not only manage to take us to some of the most beautiful birding hotspots in the park, but you also managed to bring us some very interesting biodiversity facts and landscapes of the parks. And I'm sure that people will take you up on the invite to visit our parks. We've received many compliments from people complimenting you on an incredible presentation, and one can see that you are just looking at the time that you are a passionate birder and a passionate SANParks employee, and I hope you're going to be around for a couple of years more to build on what you have already achieved in the parks. I'm going to go to, we have received a few questions and also a few suggestions. And if it's okay with you, I would like just to quickly run through them. A suggestion, maybe more than a question, from Keith Hubert was, he says, yeah, Addo Elephant National Park has such a beautiful hide in the main camp at a small pond, but it is terribly overgrown by reeds and so forth. Can something not be done in the upkeep and also make sure there's always water, even if it is artificially supplied? So, like I said, I think it's more a suggestion than a question. Chris, I can leave it with you. Maybe Andre or Pierre from Addo region are also listening, and maybe they can take it up with Nick de Goede in the park. But I'll leave that with you, Chris. Maybe you can take that further. But we've received quite an interesting question from Marty Jasper, and one that I have also came across on many occasions. First of all, he thanks you for sharing your birding enthusiasm. But his question is, what is your view on using recorded calls to try and lure out birds?
Yeah, thanks, William. Let me also, before I respond to his question, if I can say a couple of words on the hide at our main camp. It is a nice facility, and it was an honorary ranger project. The Addo honorary rangers, I think, were seminal in getting it constructed. And he is quite right. It is sort of set in a reed bed. But if you're there at the right time of year, it's an incredible, and it was very popular for the last few months because a dwarf bittern, which is not a bird normally associated with the Eastern Cape, took up residence there and was regularly reported on Trevor Hardacre's Rare Bird News. There's a breeding colony of bishops in the park, in the reed bed there, which gives the hide its name. But yeah, his point is valid. We have to find a balance between the ecological processes of the park environment and trying to create facilities that are effective and usable by the public. So I think all the feedback we'll get tonight is something that we can tabulate between the HRs and myself, and then feed it through to the various SANParks colleagues who maybe have more of a direct influence on addressing these issues. So the gentleman who asked about recordings, it is something that you have to be incredibly careful with doing it. I think most serious birders will have used callback facilities, and it is something that's become a lot easier with the advent of smartphone technology. In my sort of early days as a birder, we still had tapes, and you had to sort of get a little mini tape recorder, and it would soon become stretched when you would have to, and difficult to sort of get back to the beginning. But it's something, if you do it too much, you can really disturb the birds, particularly if they're breeding. And I think you've got to be very careful. I mean, there are a couple of instances of sort of species that I spoke about in my talk. I think of the cinnamon-breasted warblers that you can get on the Klipspringer Pass at Kruger National Park and Kgalagadi Pass in Tankwa Karoo. There have been accusations in the past that those birds are not as responsive as they previously were. So I think the onus is on us all as individuals not to overplay things, because particularly if birds are breeding, they can be disturbed, even attack their mate, or if the call is played too loud, they'll often be in fear and potentially move away from the area. So never sort of play a call at full volume, and don't overdo it. Once you've seen the bird, step away. But I do want to tell a little anecdote if I've got time. How are we doing for time? Have I got time to?
That's fine.
Yeah. Little anecdote. Yeah. I've just written, I write bi-monthly articles for one of BirdLife South Africa's publications, Lark, and those articles we will be putting on. We should have done already. We will put them on the website too. They're written about birds and birding in SANParks, Limpopo parks, and I'm writing about one of my early encounters in the Taba Rest Camp in Kruger, where I was trying to impress a girl who was with me. I just started work for SANParks, and she'd never been to the park before. She traveled up from Cape Town, and she obviously hadn't seen any of the Kruger birds, and I was trying to show her either a pearl-spotted owl or an African scorp's owl, and I was still using the tape in those days, trying to call one or both of them into this tree we'd identified. And I overshot the rewind, and I played a bit of the African barred owlet. And incredibly, all three of those little species, little diminutive owls, flew into the same branch at the same tree. So for one, it was only for a period of about 5 seconds. I had the pearl-spotted owlet, the African scorp's owl, and the African barred owlet on the same branch. It was an incredible experience. I don't think she was nearly as excited as I was. But that's that. Am I still with everyone?
Yeah, no, yeah, we all here, Chris.
Sorry, yeah, my screen sort of changed. I lost the video link, so I am still there. That's okay. Great.
Yeah, no, we can still hear you. Chris, just one more question before I read another comment and before we're going to close, and that is it's coming from Tanya Obi. And she asks, yeah, is there any birding app you specifically recommend for our parks?
Look, there are ones I think that are dedicated to specific parks, but I think the technology is such that the one that I like to use is the Roberts Bird app, and they have sort of the sort of information, all the information you need about all the parks. So that's one I'm familiar with. I have used the sort of Sassel one in the past. I think the Roberts one is a little bit more comprehensive, and the sound recordings are better, but that might be just a familiarity bias. Sassel may well have improved their product. and there may be other ones, but yeah, the one that I've used is the Roberts one.
Thank you for that, Chris. There are no further questions. There are a few remarks, however, and I see one invite, and I'm going to close with that. The one is, I see Mike Moore from West Coast, the West Coast Honorary Rangers, said, yeah, West Coast fifth height was at the salt marsh pans behind Kgalagadi. They've been demolished, but the SHRs have laid out a trail on the pans and placed a bench there to allow birders to assess these pans. So just a comment on that. I just want to tell Mike, you know, Mike posted something earlier where he said West Coast is, of course, the best birding hotspot of all parks. And I want to ask Mike a question. Yeah, why do I see you so often in the Kgalagadi? Mike, if West Coast is such a hotspot, but be that as it may, I'm saying that tongue in cheek. Chris, yeah, further, there are numerous comments and congratulations and excellent presentation, stuff like that. There is one last question from Ashraf. Ash is asking, great grey ginger with those fathomless eyes, what bird is it? The one slide you showed, you mentioned that it's a great grey ginger, and he's referring to fathomless eyes.
Yeah, it must be the Pulse fishing owl. Probably got a bit tongue-tied. Yeah, good to hear from you, Ash. I regularly see your posts on social media, and you're doing great work on the guiding front in the parks. And yeah, it's been a number of years. I haven't seen you since our wedding, so it will be good to catch up with you sometime. But unfortunately, as you've now learned, if you didn't know already, I'm down in a different part of the country. But one day I'll get up there to Kruger, and we'll make a plan to link up.
Yeah. Okay. With that, Chris, I'm gonna say goodbye to you, and thank you once again. Thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge with us, and introducing. You actually making my feet itching as well to visit some of these places. Although I'm not I am a keen birder, but I'm not knowledgeable at birding. I'm still learning. But thank you very much, Chris, for sharing that with us. And then for those of you that are still with us, I just want to remind you about our upcoming webinar. We normally present webinars every second week, but the next one is next week already. So on the 25th of May, that's next Wednesday, we will presenting a webinar with Paul Merrifield. Paul is the chairman of the Mountain Zebra Kandaboo Protected Environment. You may be familiar with that, those of you that attended the Indaba in 2019 at Mountain Zebra. That is a partnership between private landowners and SANParks between the two parks. And they are busy establishing the largest protected environmental area in the world. So please don't make sure that you register for Paul's presentation next week, and hope to see you there next week as well. And then finally, especially to our members from the public, you know, we are, the SANParks Honorary Rangers are dependent on donations. And as you've heard tonight from Chris and many of the comments, we do great work in our parks, but we are dependent on donations from the public. And as you can see on the screen, there's a snap scan. If you feel that you would like to make a donation to the SANParks Honorary Rangers, our money goes to the SANParks wish list to ensure that that we meet their priority needs. You are welcome to do a snap scan now, or you can visit our website, www.sandparksvolunteers, And thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for attending, and I wish you a blessed evening and a good week ahead. Thanks, everybody.